You're listening to 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College in Garden City, New York. I'm Bill McIntyre here with Jon Gallo, bringing you news stories about Long Island and about Long Islanders. Well, welcome to this week's Long Island News. It's February 19th, and Jon Gallo and I, Bill McIntyre, are here with Faith Jessie, who is a Newsday anchor.
Hello. How are you?
Good. How are you doing? Well,
doing all right. Trying to stay warm out of the snow.
Oh, yeah. Well, you've been having fun in the snow. We've seen you reporting all over the place.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a lot of fun. And I'm a Florida girl, so this is all pretty new to me. So
oh, boy.
I'm my first winter, really.
We'll try to touch base. I know, like we said, that you were out there in the field yesterday covering the kind of treacherous roads and knowing how that also impacts the COVID supply chain and the vaccine distribution centers and everything that's also related to the story that we primarily have here, you here to speak about, which was your reporting on the front lines of the pandemic second wave at regional hospitals. So if you want to tell us a little bit more about what you found. I know you were at Mount Sinai, the Nassau complex, and you spoke to a lot of the frontline medical workers, and just tell us what you found, because it was really compelling stuff.
Sure. So what we did was really a follow to something that one of my incredible colleagues, Jeffrey Bassinger and David Olson, did early on last year when COVID was at its peak, when Mount Sinai, South Nassau had seen an influx, an overwhelming amount of patients, like many hospitals around the world were seeing. And they called it the red zone, and they dove in and saw what was going on. So now, nearly a year later, we wanted to, not exactly a year later, but about 9 months, I guess you could say, later, we wanted to go back and see how the hospital staff are doing, especially in the midst of what many were calling a second wave. You had the holiday gatherings that happened where, people have been cooped up in the house for months. You have this argument of, well, if I don't see grandma this year, am I going to see grandma? Well, if you go and see grandma, are you going to spread COVID to her? It's like, you have a really big issue, and we're all human. We understand. I mean, people want to be with their families. So people did. Some people went home with their families and things like that. And unfortunately, it resulted in a spike in cases. So we wanted to go back to the hospital to see what it was like. We were able to visit with some of the healthcare workers that we met previously in the spring. Courtney Ciesla was an ER nurse who was pregnant at the time of the peak. She worked up until the weekend she gave birth. So she worked up to that Friday. She gave birth Sunday. Yeah. And just an incredible woman there. Had the baby. The baby is healthy. So we were able to follow up with her. Another ER doctor, Dr. Parapata. He was actually a doctor who, back when it was at its peak, he had contracted COVID, and he spread it to his newborn baby girl and his wife, something that was just heart-dropping to hear. And his newborn, he was saying, actually one of the first newborns that was in that had gotten treated for COVID at the hospital that she was at. So incredible stories there. And basically, when we were at the hospital, we were really able to go and see what was different, right? Back when it first started, nobody really knew what COVID was. We didn't know that it was a viral disease that could spread through the air. So there weren't a lot of masks being worn in the hospital, and we were trying to be like, okay, and they were trying to figure out, why is this thing spreading so rapidly? Yeah. Once they realized, okay, masks can help, you couldn't get a mask, right? It was hard to get supplies. So now they have a lot more supplies. When somebody comes into the hospital, they immediately put a mask on. Everybody is screened for COVID when they come in. They have different annexes in places where they can put people to try to stop the spread. Personal protective equipment. One of our pieces, we took you through the process of getting fitted. Just because you have a mask doesn't mean that you're going to be protected from getting the virus, from breathing in the virus. So these fitted N95 masks are basically air sealed or fitted to seal tight so that the nurses and doctors working face to face with COVID positive patients aren't spreading it, aren't taking it home and things like that. So we were taking you through that process.
Of course.
Some of the
I was going to say, because I know that was an interesting piece of that footage. I saw you had to kind of do this like air test, like you said, some kind of making sure that air wasn't coming in and out of the mask. And that's what they seem to do every day. And I know you put on that kind of contraption that even gave you more protection. But do you want to just break that down real quick? Maybe that can be helpful for people in terms of how to know that their mask is fit properly as the medical professionals do.
Sure. So it was interesting. It's called a PPE fit test. It was something that we were required training we had to go through because we were in the COVID positive wings. Mm-hmm. And basically, now I don't know if you can do this at home because obviously the hospitals have a lot more equipment. But what they had us do is they came in and it was a fit test. So they had two different sizes of mask, a smaller size and a larger size. I was fitted for the smaller size. And basically, the contraption that you see coming over my head, she was spraying a perfume. Really? And she was basically saying, if you smell something, it doesn't fit because that means that stuff is leaking through.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So I didn't smell anything. Then they had you dip your head up, down, to the side, all around. Can you smell something? No. Great. Okay. And they were showing us how to properly put it on and off. I wish I had a mask to demonstrate. But for example, you don't want to touch the inside of the mask at all. It's supposed to be not. So you have to put it on, seal it around, and then take one string, put it behind your head, take the other string, put it behind your head, and make sure it's secure. And then the mask, now that's something that you could kind of carry. They suggest you put another surgical mask over it just for that extra protection. But there's a lot of other steps. There's a gown, a proper way to put the gown on and off. To remove it, you grab it here and pull it off so you're not touching anything here. And those gowns are, anytime a doctor goes and sees one patient, they immediately rip it off, put on another one to go see the other patient. So you imagine how much of the stuff they're going through every single day. Right?
Of course. And to your point earlier, that in the beginning, they didn't have a lot of that material to kind of use in that way. I know they talked about having to put their masks in the brown bags and having to reuse them. But now, thankfully, since you've gone back, now you're seeing that they do have a better capacity to just use it the one time and to, then use new ones. Is that's what you're seeing, thankfully?
To my understanding, the hospital has plenty of PPE. And I do want to note, because for some people, I know I got some feedback that this hospital, just like any other company, is its own hospital. So we can only speak for what's happening at Mount Sinai, South Nassau. There might be other hospitals who might not have as plentiful PPE, but at this specific campus, we are told that they do have enough now. But I do want to make that clarification because I don't want people to think that, that's everywhere. Because I don't know.
Fair disclaimer. But like you said, in general, we're seeing that it wasn't the same problems, like you mentioned, from the first spike back in April and so forth. So that's good to hear. And that's important for people to know, definitely.
But nevertheless, for a crew of doctors, changing the PPE that often, we're talking about truckloads of stuff at the end of the day. That has to be disposed of.
It's a lot of equipment. Now, a lot of the gowns and things like these are disposable items. The gloves, the gowns. Now, this is not a thick cotton gown. It's like a very thin kind of paper.
Tyvek kind of thing.
Not paper, some type of fabric, but it's disposable. Yeah. But yes, it's stuff that they have to use every single day, each patient, and they can't contaminate. They have to. You're talking lots of wipes, lots of disinfectant. Because you have to disinfect every single thing each time that you're going in and out. So we were hoping when we were showing this piece to show people the reality that there is still a need, that it is still going on. Because, after so much, you're hearing about COVID this, COVID that, it gets a little stale. You kind of get tired of hearing it and then you get a little lax. But the reality of it is that there's still men and women going in every single day, risking their lives with this virus that we're still learning about it. There's a vaccine now. There are different precautions that we know more about it, but we're still learning things about this virus every single day.
Yeah, of course. And it seems in some cases that it's not like a virus where it affects everybody the same way.
Right.
It seems, some people are having respiratory issues, others nerve problems, I think this is going to be a news story for years to come, only because of the ramifications.
And Bill, I'm happy that you made that point, because one thing that I do want to mention for everybody listening is that was one of the main points that ER nurse Courtney Ciesla made, is that coronavirus does not affect everybody the same way. Some people's family members might have gotten it, and maybe you have gotten it and had a mild case, and you think, it's not that bad.
Right.
Then there's other people that have gone through excruciating pains. One woman I spoke with, she said it felt like her chest cavities was being squeezed and pressed in, so it affects everybody differently, and everybody, even the people that you don't know, you have to take it as serious as a feeling like your chest is getting crushed in, because just because you don't feel that doesn't mean that somebody else isn't.
Exactly.
I just want to.
Right. Yeah. And it could also be a case of you don't feel that yet.
Right.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you're never going to get,
If you get
and then the kids,
treatment early, of course, is important. Go ahead, Bill.
And then the kids are a whole nother thing, because here initially we were saying that, well, it doesn't seem like it's affecting the kids that much. And, and it didn't seem to. We all thought when kids went back to school, we were thinking, oh, my God, it's going to be one big coronavirus, mess.
Petri dish. Yeah.
And it didn't turn out that way. That's why I keep applauding the kids. I think they're the unsung heroes in this whole thing. Not beside the frontline workers. They, that goes without saying.
Of course.
But the kids, the expectation we had is totally different than what happened. And now the schools are the ones where we can see, there was a case here and there's a case there. So it narrowed it down for us as far as where the hot spots were. The kids did a great job, and they're still doing a great job.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine trying to keep a mask on a kid in the second grade.
No, it certainly seems like a challenge, for a lot of ways. But I think as we had this discussion with other of your colleagues, Faith, and with with the county executive and other officials, that with the kids, maybe it's easier in a sense, kind of like with the medical professionals, where they can be more regimented. They can be more kind of rigid in the sense of, this is what we're told. This is kind of coming from the top. And we all just kind of do this compliance. And that's hopefully what we're seeing maybe between, obviously, the medical workers who know how important it is from seeing this firsthand. But for folks who don't see it from the general public, I think that's maybe what's lost. But for the kids specifically, Bill, to that point, I think a lot of them, they're trusting, they're listening to the teachers. I don't know if it's the same thing for the college students and some of the older kids, but in general, for the young ones, again, the structure, the nap time, everything like that tends to be at least my just layman's perspective. Go ahead, Bill.
Just a reminder that you're listening to 90.3 WHPC, the voice of Nassau Community College, and we are here with Faith Jessie, the Newsday anchor.
We know, as you mentioned, that this virus is very cruel because it affects people sometimes very mildly, but other times it is certainly fatal. And I know there was one gentleman who you were reporting on who passed away, and unfortunately, you noted that in memoriam at the end of that piece, and just seeing, how he was just sharing such a heartfelt message of, please, take care of yourself and do it. You just want to talk about, again, that individual tragedy and how, obviously it disrupts and destroys families, but also how that weighs on the medical workers who are there, every day trying to help these people.
Absolutely. So the gentleman you're speaking of, his name is Kenneth Murphy. He's from Valley Stream. He was 73 years old. And I was trying to pull up because I spoke with his son after he passed, and he worked at a country club out here. I want to say it was Hempstead, but I don't know. Okay, cool. And I wish I knew, because I would love to give him a shout out. I'm sure whoever's listening, if you knew that Kenneth Murphy worked at your country club for 30 something years, shout out to that country club.
Most definitely. Yep.
Murphy, he was such a delight to speak with. You could tell he was a no-nonsense type of guy. Mm-hmm. Had been in the hospital since Christmas. We were there the first week of January. So he was struggling. He was on a BiPAP machine. He wasn't on a ventilator, so it wasn't an intrusive breathing, but the BiPAP machine is still a mask that has to go over his face to help him breathe. And it was when we were speaking with him, the words that he said, he couldn't say much, but he said, do what they tell you. Don't be stupid, wear a mask. And before, when we went to, we were all rooting for Kenneth. We did not know that he was going to pass. Unfortunately, a couple of weeks after we visited him and before we published the story, we got an alert from the hospital that he had passed away. And was not able to go back home because of this virus. And, we spoke with his family. And they were very supportive of us moving on with the story so that his message could go out there. But it just goes to show, they're crushed. A lot of people, I went, you go and see the Facebook wishing well and things like that. And we have to understand that Kenneth is one of so many. I feel like we get so caught up into the numbers, right? Yep. We're like, 200 people, 1 million people, blah, 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 whatever. And you have to understand that each one of those numbers is a human being with a life, with a mother, a father, probably children. You know what I'm saying? A story.
A community member, someone who has an identity, who's been involved in whatever they have been for all those years. And like you said, sometimes we get lost from the qualitative information of who these people are. We see them, as statistics, for a lot of other issues as well. But it's really important, to see that, again, full HD, that full. Even, with his voice being limited in the capacity to breathe, just that's so compelling. I think for even people who those numbers, they hear it and it kind of rolls off their ear. Like you said, they have COVID fatigue. They hear, okay, 200, 1,000, whatever it is. It's not the people they know. So it's not as real. Right. But when you see someone like that, who's so relatable to a lot of Long Islanders, like you said, a no nonsense kind of guy, I believe a veteran.
And I'm telling you, yes. And he was a colorful veteran. He served in Vietnam. And he received multiple Purple Hearts, his family told me, a Silver Star as well. And when we spoke with Kenneth, you could tell he was just doing what he had to do to get home to his grandkid. Yeah. And he was like, what do I need to do, Doc? What's going on with the breathing today, Doc? And he was there. He was a trooper, and you could tell he was. And it's just, hopefully when people see that, they'll realize that it's still out there. It's still very real. And that could be your dad. That could be your grandfather. That could be your uncle, So it's just important to, even though you might not know the people, to do the precautions to protect people that you might not know, as well as people that you might know.
Definitely. And including those medical workers themselves who are working so hard to fight for every life. And like we said, it's not just the in the moment kind of situation, but like with a lot of other workers who are in such a treacherous environment, there's a lot of potential trauma and kind of, I'm sure, emotional stress, also trying to keep their family safe, knowing that this is the environment they're in. So you want to talk a little bit more about some of the people you spoke with there and how they're still managing that this far out now, like you said, coming on near a year and, I guess going through that second wave?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I will say that it seems like from a general consensus of people who I spoke with, they're more prepared. Basically, going through the worst of it last spring prepared them for today. Like I was saying, different precautions are taken. Everyone's given a COVID test. Everyone is masked up. They have actually different procedures now. Back in November, the FDA did an emergency authorization approval for something called the monoclonal antibody treatment. Yep. If you aren't familiar with this treatment, it's the same treatment that former President Donald Trump and former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie received. And basically what it is the hospital's way to keep high-risk patients that have gotten COVID out of the hospital. And we spoke with one woman while she was receiving the treatment. She actually had the IV in her arm. We were on Zoom with her, and she said, that was the woman that I spoke with who said it felt like her chest was almost caving in, like it just felt so painful for her. But she said it's a very relaxing experience while she's getting the IV, the antibodies pumped into her system to fight off the virus. And then we also spoke with one woman who was one of the first to receive the treatment back in November when they started offering it, who's recovered now. And so that is something that they did not have in the spring. Yeah. And it's something that a lot of the high risk, those who have pre-existing conditions, if you're over a certain age, you can be recommended for this treatment. Another big difference that they're doing in the hospital is just the fact that they are able to kind of separate everyone. They don't have this massive influx of people. Dr. Glatt, who is one of the infectious disease, I believe he's the chief infectious disease officer at the hospital. And he was saying at one time, if they were lucky enough to discharge one patient, there were 5 new patients trying to get that bed, Yeah. And now it's a little bit slower. The healthcare workers can kind of take a deep breath. And once again, it's still, every day is different. I know the Monday before we went to film, they said it got pretty bad. And then it slowed down again. So these numbers are still fluctuating. I can't come out and say right now, it's all good, because next week it could be different. It could be different tomorrow. It could be different today. I'm not at the hospital right now. So it's something that's changing every single day.
You're right. Exactly. And it's important as we see that thankfully these numbers in terms of rate of infection and hospitalizations are seemingly coming down back to pre-Thanksgiving levels. But clearly, even with the vaccine and the issues along that distribution process, that we clearly don't want to go back in that direction because we know how tragic it is. Like you said, knowing in the beginning of the process, people, having to be in triage settings in hallways and just anywhere, like it's a mass kind of casualty type of event. So we're glad to see that therapeutics and treatments in the hospitals and support, like I was saying, I know is there for these employees. I'm sure they need social workers and people that can help them just manage, again, all this type of stress and trauma, even more than they kind of deal with on a regular basis being in a hospital.
Yeah.
It's a lot of
I'm sorry, go ahead. We want to hear you.
No, I was gonna say, just like, it's funny because I did ask some of the health workers, like, what are you doing because as a journalist, from reporting on it from the beginning, and I'm not a healthcare worker, I'm not there physically, helping these people. I'm just talking about it. And I was affected, just like many of you at home were probably affected from listening to it.
You guys those images.
Yeah, you're on the front lines. How do you cope with this? And, the first thing they told me is, this is my job. This is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to do it. And the second thing is, well, I am human. So I exercise just like you. I try to read my books just like you. I try to do yoga just like you. But at the end of the day, this is my job. This is what I trained for. And the battle's on. And the people that I spoke with at least said, I'm here to stay. I'm going to do what I need to do.
Yeah, right. You didn't sign up to be a war correspondent, did you?
Yeah, in a sense.
But
it really is like it. It really is like it.
Yes, yeah. I bet it is. I think that you hit one of the nails on the head. I think because I think one of the biggest things that's against all of us is our own nature. John said it, when the numbers start coming down, people will see that, not correctly, but they'll see that as an indication that, we're winning. And maybe now we can go out to that thing or go visit the family. And, it's the equivalent of you can't put out a fire a little bit, because once you turn your back, and that's what this is, we have to know that it's really stamped out before any of us can relax, really. Yeah.
And I think that to that point, I would say, just from covering it and speaking to people in the community, and it'll go back to my last point, is that we are all human. For me to tell you to stay inside and to not do anything, you'll go crazy, right? At least for me, I'm an extrovert. I need social interaction. But the point is, if we are going to try to get back to normal, if you are going to go have an outdoor dining experience, are you making sure that you're safe? Are you just disregarding taking your tequila shots at the bar and just laughing and talking and stuff like it was pre-COVID, and then going home to your parents, kids, whatever? Or are you trying to follow the precautions? Are you doing what the recommendations of Dr. Fauci, the government, stay 6 feet apart, making sure that if you are a restaurant owner, making sure that you're closing down at the right times, making sure that all of the safety precautions are there. And I think it's just going to be a community effort to really try to get through it with all of the restrictions and do what we need to do and buckle down, so that by this time next year, we're all having a good time doing whatever we're doing and no mask involved, So
amen to that, of course. But in the meantime, like you said, we certainly have to make sure that we still collectively don't let our guard down, and we practice self-care, and we focus on those among us who are struggling maybe more, and make sure that we continue to reach out. It's not just something that, I know with all these kind of messaging and PR about, make sure you help out your neighbors, maybe in March and April, but that's still just as important to make sure people are doing good, both physically and mentally, of course, with all the challenges going on at the moment. So that is certainly important. And I think, like I said, that is really amazing footage, and we really recommend everyone listening to definitely go check it out as soon as they can at newsday.com. The best place, is there a specific link or a specific website that you think so they can see that footage, Faith?
Yes, it's very easy. Newsday.com/second wave. That's second spelled out SECOND wave.
Yep, there you go. So definitely everyone do that. And then just in the time that we still have you here, we just wanted to segue, because we know that you've been certainly busy covering that issue. And also, you've been busy in the studio and had that nice new studio that Newsday has got that we're all happy to see you guys got some funding for and have been using to its full capacity. And I know that you actually also anchored and moderated the discussion with Dr. Fauci recently that Newsday hosted. So do you want to talk a little bit about that too, your experience, again, being in that position and knowing how that's just an interesting thing that I'm sure many of our listeners are curious what your experience was?
Absolutely. So, I mean, that was an incredible experience because I feel like a lot of people who, just like us, everybody was watching the TV every single day with COVID, and we saw Dr. Fauci, and he kind of became more than, Dr. Fauci has been around for a long, long time, y'all. You know, a long time.
A lot of administrations, exactly. Yep.
A very long time. But for whatever reason, I guess with TV, social media, this year, he kind of became this celebrity figure. And it was a treat really sitting down with him and asking him what you all wanted to know. That was the whole purpose of the conversation. We hear him on CNN and Fox and all of these other different news outlets, but here is your own hometown news outlet. What are your questions? What do you want to ask? And my colleague, Randy Marshall, with the editorial team, she also helped with the conversation. And we really just dove in to ask Dr. Fauci some of those questions. If I'm allergic, if I have allergies, should I take the vaccine? And he says, well, consult with your medical advisor before you do. Do I have a choice between the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine? And at that time, he said, well, just take what you get. Most likely, no, you're not going to have a choice. Just take what you could get. Different questions like that. Some of the questions that you all have, I believe that is archived on Newsday.com if you all want to go and see that. And I also want to preface that by saying that interview is now old. So some of the things that he said might have changed. So if you do go and watch that, you just know that this is a constantly changing virus. So just make sure you have
science and the information is obviously determined by new data, and that, like you said, with this virus being a novel situation, that's always occurring. So definitely, like you said, also consult your primary physicians and health professionals regarding any personal matter. But definitely, like you said, there was a lot of great content there, and we were happy to see you, being at the front of it. And another piece that we saw that you had reported on that I know Bill and I want to touch on in the last few minutes we have with you that is close to Bill's heart, as he is an entertainer in the Long Island music scene himself with a band with his daughter, and they have their own whole Patreon world and all that stuff. But we know that you did cover the struggles of the LI art scene and the local, again, venues and musicians. Can you just talk a little bit more about how that went and again, what those people told you and what they're going through?
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you mentioned that because it's actually something that just dropped this week, The Longest Intermission. And it is an incredible long form piece, about 8 minutes, no longer than 10 minutes, highlighting 5 incredible performers who call Long Island home. We have this incredible 14-year-old Broadway star, Michaela Connelly, and she was able to get a spot at 14 years old for Harry Potter playing on Broadway. He, just like all other performers, got a notice one day, had no idea, was going to the show and didn't realize that was going to be her last show. So for her parents, their colleagues, it was really disheartening. And then all the way from 14-year-old Michaela to older performers, that's some people balancing 2 different jobs. Rick Coran, you guys might know him with Jilly Dog. He plays poker with the dogs and does all of the tricks with his dog. He was going around. He used to do the shows, but now he's been doing stuff online. And it's really been a therapeutic thing for a lot of folks going through COVID. He was mentioning that a woman reached out saying, your videos have really pulled me through. And so it was just incredible. There, a lot of them are now turning to Instagram. So we definitely have to try to support the art.
We've basically been doing that exact thing is, once a week, we do a half an hour show. People tune in to see it. I mean, right now, it's the only game in town. And I feel terrible for the people that don't have access to that kind of gear to be able to even do that. It was surprising to me to see how many people start to tune in regularly once you do it every week. It's like the old days of TV where you waited for the next week to get the next episode of your favorite show. thank you for what you do. And I also have to ask you, just to make sure before we let you go, if we give a holler or if you ever want to, please get in touch with us. We'll come right back on the air.
Yes, that would be great. Thank you, guys. It's so nice meeting you all. And I'm very new to Newsday. I started here in August. So to all of Long Island listening, I finally learned that it's on Long Island and not Long Island. Everybody on Twitter.
You 101.
I'm still learning, and I'm happy to be
in line.
Yeah, it's okay. You're a transplant. You got a little extra time.
But it sounds like you hit the ground running. If you just got here, you're already you're in deep. So that's good.
Exactly. So we'll keep watching again. You and Faith Jessie from Newsday, anchor. And where's the best place for people to follow you on social media?
Facebook, I'm just Faith Jessie Newsday. If you search that, I should come up. Or on Instagram, I'm pretty active. It's just F, my first initial, and then Jessie, Jessie. Pretty active on Instagram.
Check her out very much, Faith. And we'll have her on another time. So thank you again. Have a great rest of your day and weekend, Faith.
Be well.
Thanks, guys.
And now on to Michael O'Keefe, her colleague, who was patiently waiting. And we're happy to speak about another number of issues that are impacting Nassau. Specifically, we know he's done a lot of reporting lately on the continuation of the PBA contract discussion, and I'm sure he has a lot to lay out because that's been...
Hello, Michael. How are you?
Hi, good afternoon, guys. How are you doing?
Good to see you again, Michael. Know you're keeping busy. Hope you're keeping warm.
Yeah.
And we were just talking to your colleague, Faith, and I know she was out in the snow yesterday covering some of the... that kind of beat. And I know, again, you've been busy covering your own beat. We just mentioned, of course, the NCPD contract. Yes. There's obviously the discussion of where NCPD is in meeting the reforms that were passed by the governor's office in the wake of the summer's, again, kind of incidents when it comes to police brutality. So we just wanted to have you on, just kind of get your perspective on what you've been seeing from your recent reporting and, kind of have that discussion and how that segues into the larger context of what's going on right now on Long Island and in the nation, to be honest. So thanks again for joining us, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay.
I think there's a sort of a confluence of issues that are all kind of crashing down on Nassau County right now. The Police Benevolent Association has been operating without a contract since the end of 2017. But they're negotiating for a contract with the county at a time, as you mentioned, when there's also these loud calls for police reforms. And it seems like the current administration, County Executive Laura Curran's administration, is trying to get a deal done with the unions this year. This has upset a lot of community activists because they feel like the plan for police reform is the horse before the cart, and that should be taken care of first. And then you can sort of, if you negotiate or if you develop a plan that calls for a civilian review board, for example, if you've already got contracts talking about how discipline will be conducted, how do you do that? How do you install how do you create a civilian review board? So it's a tricky time right now, and I think Laura Curran is walking a tightrope, and it's one of these situations where she's not going to keep everyone happy, and maybe nobody happy.
Right.
Yeah, and it's an election year, so it's something I'm sure that countywide, although it comes down to policy, politics is still, for better or worse, at play in a lot of these decisions. We know that there's going to be, as we talked to Commissioner Ryder. That is it correct that they were supposed to get their plan in, I believe, by the 15th to the legislature, and the legislature was going to kind of debate and try to make some kind of changes to it? Was that still what was happening, Michael?
I'm not sure of the timeline in Nassau. They did just send the proposed plan to the legislature. That was just a few days ago, and then they have until April 1st to submit it to the governor's office.
Okay, that makes sense. But yeah, like I said, we spoke about it with Commissioner Ryder, and clearly, they have a perspective, and they think the two issues, contract and reform, are unrelated. But clearly, advocates, like you said, see it otherwise, and that there's been a breakdown in discussions from some groups like NAACP and some of these other kind of more grassroots organizations saying that they haven't had their input really considered. So I know that they've kind of released their whole separate plan. Is that correct?
Yes, a number of people left the advisory committee that the county had created, including Tracy Edwards, who's the head of the NAACP on Long Island, and Frederick Brewington, who's a very well-known civil rights attorney and activist here on Long Island. And they released a plan yesterday, the People's Plan, that called for example, a civilian review board. They're seeking more accountability. They're trying to sort of take resources away from the police, perhaps, or we want to put resources into creating teams that would handle people having issues with mental health, for example, people having issues with substance abuse. So sort of take those issues out of law enforcement and hand them to people who are trained in mental health issues and in substance abuse issues and those kind of things.
I see. People talk about social workers and different folks who can do that kind of outreach who aren't law enforcement.
I think the plan is calling basically for more equitable policing and also collection of data so that we can prove that policing is equitable. Right now, in Suffolk County, we just saw that people of color are overwhelmingly pulled over more than white people are in terms of traffic stops. Nassau did not collect that information until just recently. And so we'll see how that works out. But that's one of the things just the advocates were asking for is just more information on what you guys are doing, more transparency on what you're doing.
No, exactly. And is it correct? Wasn't it reported that Newsday, your colleagues, the entity is suing NCPD for some data, maybe with a FOIA request? Is that accurate? That we've heard recently?
Yes. There was a FOIA request for information, and Nassau had apparently been dragging their feet on getting to Newsday.
I see. Okay, and then is that directly related to both the reform or the contract?
It is related to the reform more than the contract. I haven't been involved in that, so I'm not familiar with all the particulars. You'll have to forgive me on that, but I'm not entirely clear what they were seeking. But they were seeking, information that the county, that the police department had been dragging their feet on.
Right. I believe there's actually two cases that the county paid out close to $11 million, maybe a little bit more than that, to two specific cases, and the police department has been reticent to divulge information about, I think, the disposition of the police officers in those cases.
Yes.
So that's the issue.
I see.
And it was a Freedom of Information request, so those are supposed to be fulfilled, but
they take time. As many reporters know, of course.
They take time, and a lot of times they find reasons to deny, sending you the information. There's an ongoing investigation. It's a personnel matter. It's a medical issue involved or this or that. So it's not hard for them to come up with ways. I'm not saying that they're legitimate, but they come up with ways to deny that information.
Yeah, of course.
There are a lot of things, I'll tell you, that fall under the Freedom of Information Act that would drive you nuts. I used to work in construction, and you would call a town hall because you wanted to know when a bid was going to go off for something. But they couldn't tell you. You had to file a Freedom of Information Act to get the date for a construction bid.
Yeah.
I don't think that should fall. I don't think that's that sensitive information. But
of course not. No.
It gets crazy.
Like you said, there seems to be a bit of subjectivity in how which ones get kind of moved or expedited versus which ones kind of languish. So that's good to know for folks who weren't too familiar with that process, and obviously how it is a pivotal tool for especially investigative reporters and folks covering these types of beats like yourself. And I did want to touch on, because related to the conversation about reform, we know that you had reported earlier in the month that Suffolk PD, they had sent, I believe, a contingent of their officers down to actually Ferguson to be a part of some type of anti-bias program. I think that's out of their department. Can you talk about a little bit more about that? Because we did ask the commissioner about that, and he didn't really give us a full kind of understanding of what their involvement with the same training is, but he did say obviously they're working with them on a daily basis on a number of things. But you want to tell us about that report?
This stems from the U.S. Department of Justice agreement with Suffolk County. If you remember, going back to 2008, there was a man named Marcelo Lucero who was murdered in Patchogue by a group of teenagers. He was attacked by a group of teenagers, and he was murdered.
Hate crime.
Yes, clearly a hate crime. Once that kind of came out, there was a lot of reporting and a lot of people complaining about the way the Suffolk County Police Department interacts with its Latino citizens. You might remember this was right around the time of Steve Levy, who was the county executive, sort of a pioneer in immigrant bashing, one of the guys who wanted to close the doors to new people coming into this country. So anyway, the Justice Department and Suffolk came to an agreement to reform policing and serve the community better. And one of the things that came out of that was this anti-bias training. Risco mentioned Lewis as a deputy commissioner. She's been very active in developing this program. So Suffolk developed this with input from the Department of Justice. They're at a point now where the Department of Justice is asking them to share the program with other departments. The police department in Ferguson, Missouri, if you remember correctly, was accused of brutality, of shooting an unarmed kid, Michael Brown, in 2014. They've been under a consent agreement, a similar agreement with the Justice Department. And so Justice basically asked Suffolk, hey, come on in and share what you've learned with this department. Provide them your expertise. And a group of officers went down and spent a few days in Ferguson in January.
I see. And like I said, do you know any more in terms of what if NCPD, if Suffolk is involved, that specific unit, with the discussions about reforms here in Nassau? Are you or any of your colleagues aware of that through reporting? Or?
Well, I think, the plan that is being developed in Nassau County, Nassau does not have this similar agreement with the Justice Department that Suffolk has. So they don't have any mandates to do this. But we know that they are going to emphasize anti-bias training, de-escalation training in the reform plan that was released this week. It's a less formal thing than a less codified thing than a consent agreement. This was a settlement that Suffolk went into willingly rather than have it imposed on them by the Justice Department. I think it's, back then they were probably thinking, let's volunteer so we don't get dragged into something that we don't want to get dragged into. But it's worked out. I think that we've seen improvements in policing in Suffolk. Still have a ways to go, of course. But I
would love to have been a fly on the wall to see what actually occurred when the Suffolk police officers arrived in, to talk
Ferguson.
to the other, in Ferguson, to see just how that was taken. As far as are you guys interfering with what we do, or were they receptive to the idea that they're going to help us be better?
Yeah,
Ferguson's a beleaguered police department. It kind of became a symbol of everything that Black Lives Matter is protesting against, and so I imagine that at least the brass welcomed this training, for no other reason, is just to sort of help with community relations, just give you a sense that we're doing something.
We're doing something, right.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, at this point, I have to remind our listening audience that you're listening to 90.3 WHPC, the radio voice of Nassau Community College in Garden City, New York, and we're here with Michael O'Keefe, Newsday reporter, who's filling us in on all the good news from. He's been out there investigating many things. You've been busy.
Yeah. Yes. Good news, depending, but definitely, complex and important news. Like you said, seeing, what's happening. And we do know that the commissioner, obviously they're going to have this new training complex right here on Nassau Community College's campus. And that they are focusing a lot on community policing, on recruiting more diverse, recruits and candidates, and, focusing on, like you said, de-escalation and other things. That all sound good, of course, certainly on paper. But like he admitted that clearly, PBA, they're always going to have an interest, and community activists are always going to have an interest. But it's trying to find where we can meet in the middle and actually get some progress made, like you said, that's tangible and not just something that we have to revisit and say, okay, well, we still have to do this again down the road. So that is important. And, we'll obviously have to follow up on that more down the road with you and your other colleagues. I think in the time we have you still, we wanted to also discuss, because you had reported on a number of people, which we didn't ask him directly, but we asked the county executive about, in terms of people from Long Island, Nassau County, and Suffolk County who were involved with the Capitol insurrection, with the deadly riots there, who then were found either investigated by DOJ or, being, I guess, caught up in that web of people who were there that day. So you want to tell us again about what you're finding and what NCPD and SCPD, if they have any involvement with this process?
I'm not aware of the local police departments having any involvement in that process, other than, maybe if someone had to go execute an arrest warrant or something, they might have backed up, federal support agents or something like that. But, and I think they were also looking in their own ranks to see if any of their members were involved. I think there was internal discussions and internal reviews of that. I'm not aware of any active police officers that were involved in the Capitol riot. But there were quite a few people from Long Island and the New York area. There was the one guy I keep laughing about was the dating coach, was a guy who he's a pickup artist coach who you read this guy's website or his Facebook page, and it's very funny. I don't know what woman would give him the time of day, the way the misogyny that is just sort of oozing from everything that he has to say.
It certainly displays a clear lack of judgment, which may have contributed to him making the very poor decision of being there that day. In that capacity.
There was a young man. There was a guy in his 20s we wrote about. He was pretty young. It's just the whole thing was just very disturbing. And of course, there were going to be people from New York and Long Island there, just given the size of our population. But I think, what I saw was that, talk about economic anxiety sort of fueling this rage that these people felt. Right. None of these people seem to me to be in particularly dire straits. I don't know their financial situations, but it just seems like, these are middle-class people lashing out for reasons other than economic anxiety, whether it's racism or it's anti-Semitism or just ignorance. I don't, you have to talk to each one about it, but it's just really disturbing to me that our neighbors and our relatives are participating in this kind of nonsense.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. No. And like you said, that's why I know we spoke about it, Bill. And you did mention it to the commissioner, the idea of that. I believe it was Department of Defense that they were ordering a review of both some of the armed military services and branches to make sure. Again, 60 days. Might have been retired people with kind of paraphernalia. I know there was retired FDNY.
Retired FDNY guy. Yeah.
And I know I think you reported on an MTA employee also. Who was caught up in this, and realizing that, like you said, that these aren't necessarily the people that they're in a cave somewhere, but they're people that are out in the community, right. And if this is what they're doing in that moment, especially if they're in a position of power. And just real fast, Bill, I just wanted to mention, because I don't know if you reported on it, but I know it was reported and we spoke about it with Commissioner Ryder, that there was actually an NYPD official who was in a human relations kind of department, and he was overseeing kind of complaints about maybe racial inequity and different types of just HR complaints. But then they found out he was online and he was posting under some kind of alias, a bunch of, hateful kind of random rants and things against, women and other minorities. So just to your point, it clearly is a pervasive problem, and needs to be rooted out.
There's a website that I look at every once in a while, a forum called The Rant, and it looks like it's primarily NYPD officers or retired NYPD officers, but it'll curl your hair. I mean, it's just like, just these guys posting opinions that are coming out of right field. They're just like not based in fact, really ugly stuff. When we hear, sometimes police officers or police union leaders just, demonize people, I think that's part of the problem. I think that when you hear for years and years that liberals or Democrats or people who don't agree with you are pedophiles, criminals, communists,
eating babies,
rather than just say we have a different approach to government, we have a different idea on how we should do things. That's really disturbing to me.
Yeah. When we spoke to the police commissioner, the reason I brought up the general doing that with the complete armed services of the United States, and also one of the things the general said is that the military has not yet defined the word extremism. So that was one of the things they were attempting to do, so that when they went to look, they could say, "Oh, here's one," or "Here's one," or "No, not that guy." They had a definition to work with.
Yeah.
But I brought that up to the commissioner because I said, in a different sense, the Nassau County Police Department is 2,400 strong, and to me, the template from the military should probably be applied to every local police department. We need to all get on the same page and say, this is extremism, this is not acceptable, and these things are, and whatever it is. Because I think, and I know I'm really reaching, and maybe not, but this idea of right-wing extremism, this has been around since, I could go back in history and read from 1900.
Yeah.
And every few years it rears its ugly head. And this last time, it reared more than its ugly head. It's
fully on display, fully, the people felt open to think that
to think that in our chain of command and in our government that there's key people in there that could, with one phone call, thwart what a whole bunch of people tried to get done, no matter what it is, that's a scary thought. And if a general from the military is taking it seriously and saying, I got to look at my own troops before I look at anything else. To me, that's pretty serious if he's taking it that way.
Yeah. If you recall, look at the 1980s, the Oklahoma City bombing, some of the issues, the shootouts and robberies and things that right-wing extremists had. This was all done very surreptitiously. This was all done. Obviously, the internet had not, was not a factor in the 1980s. But there was almost sort of surreptitious approach that these extremists took. Now it's all in the open. Now there's no hiding it.
That's the issue, and people are being drawn to that. Like I said, that this isn't a new thing. Unfortunately, white nationalism, other ethnic identities, and hate-based concepts like anti-Semitism are as old as time is, unfortunately. But it's a matter of, like you said, that maybe these people feel more comfortable with coming into the public and finding some kind of odd solidarity in their hate. And that's the issue. And I know we spoke about that with your colleague, Robert Brodsky, and talking about Parler and all these other social media platforms that, as we discussed the bill, where people not only that they, again, don't know what's true, but they are so committed to something that is objectively false being reality. And it's just such a difficult thing, because if you're not from that bubble, how do you really have a conversation with them? They just kind of cast you out, like you said, and dehumanize, your point of view. So it is certainly very concerning to see it at all levels.
I'm curious, Michael, how do you react to people in general calling for unity?
Well, I think when you talk about unity, that's the goal. But how you get there is sort of that's the tricky part, right? You can't have healing without acknowledging that wrongs were done. You can't move forward without saying we have to acknowledge that some pretty ugly things were done. And I think that's where we are in a lot of, even before sort of President Biden took office and he said he wanted to make unity a goal. And of course he gets criticized now because everything he does that Republicans don't like, they throw that in his face. But I think you need to go back really centuries in American history, and we need to go back and look at the wrongs that were committed to the African people we brought here, the Native people that we brought here, the Native people that we brought here. Right? They were here, of course. We need to talk about the abuse of women and the abuse of workers, and we also need to acknowledge that I may be a victim, but I also may be a perpetrator in the gears of history as they grind down. I may have benefited from some of these things. I may have suffered as a result of some of these things.
Yeah.
And it's very complicated, but we need that conversation.
Of course. And when the goal, like you said, is unity and reconciliation, it takes those hard truths for people to know how to get there. Without that, you're kind of just still fumbling around in the dark. The picture isn't as clear as it needs to be to really make these difficult kind of changes. And, the other thing is, too, and we have to go in a few minutes, but just seeing, that a lot of the people who were most harmed during the insurrection were law enforcement officers themselves, of the people who a lot of folks at times on the right, obviously kind of wrap themselves around and really support. But meanwhile, these were the people that were getting impaled with literally American flags and fire.
Or with blue line flags.
Yeah,
blue line
exactly.
flags.
So it really is a strange situation. And it's certainly, we hope is as ugly as it will be. But, we also can't be naive and think that, this is something that is, in a vacuum. That's something that's, anecdotal. But like I said, I don't know. It is certainly problematic, and it's interesting when you see it touch home, like you said, in these local people who were involved. What else, I guess, Mike, just in the couple of minutes we got, that you're going to be working on that you think we should watch out for and follow along, both with the PBA and anything else?
Yeah, I think that that is a real important issue to look at, the PBA contract in Nassau County and what comes out of that, because the county is stretched to the limits in terms of financial resources right now. The pandemic has had a huge impact on tax revenues, and the county, like every other government, is looking for Washington to bail it out. At the same time, there's this power struggle within the PBA. There was a group that wanted to go to arbitration. They thought they could get a better deal. They didn't want to do a contract with Laura Curran. They wanted to wait until maybe a Republican became county executive again. So it's going to be interesting to see now that these negotiations have started. Does the county have much more that they can offer to the PBA? And at the same time, does the PBA want to continue to operate with all these internal divisions and at the same time not have a contract? So that's going to be really interesting, I think. I think, one other thing to look at is just the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on drug abuse and domestic violence and sexual abuse there's going to be a lot of trauma that comes out. There's a lot of hidden trauma that comes out of this last year or so.
Yes, you're certainly right. And
great.
We'll certainly continue to monitor that and monitor the great work that you and your colleagues do. We know that, I believe it was your colleague, I think Rachel Blidner, was giving the update on SPS and, seeing, we've talked about the issues with domestic violence, with the opioid epidemic. And, it certainly is a fully compounding effect, kind of situation from the pandemic. And like I said, we'll certainly follow what you're doing at Newsday. Obviously, we always urge our listeners to go follow Michael and Faith Jessie, who we had on before. They're reporting in Newsday, newsday.com. Subscribe. And then you can also follow, Mike at MOKNYC on Twitter. And is there anywhere else that would be best for people just to follow you as well for the stuff that you're doing kind of in real time?
Twitter is best. I think that's where I post most of my work.
Okay, so that's what I urge you to do. I definitely follow him, and it's definitely always a good read, and he's always covering things that impact LI and the surroundings. So thank you so much again, Michael.
Yes, thank you very much,
guys.
Oh, thanks for coming on. And it seems to happen all the time. Just when we get to the end of the show, I've got 25 more questions for you. So we could go another 4 hours.
Another day.
I'd be happy to come back.
That's all I needed to know. Thank you very much.
Issues ain't going away. So thanks, Mike. We'll follow along. Have a good weekend.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye.
And the clock on the wall says it's time for this week's Long Island News to move on out of here. Jon Gallo, got something to say quick?
Thank you guys as always. Follow us on TWLI News, Facebook, social media, Instagram, wherever you go follow podcasts, watch and share. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Great. And we'll see you next time, same place, right here on 90.3 WHPC.